The Florida Panthers were front and center at some events in the South Florida sports scene. And what quote from a cinematic legend best describes the Panthers finally winning the Stanley Cup? We'll discuss that more on today's Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
You're Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into this Tuesday, September 10th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez from the Hockey News. You can follow me on X at MondoMan12. Follow the show account on X and Instagram at LO_FLA Panthers. And shout out to the everydayers who come back here and get your daily Florida Panthers fix, and 3 to 4 times a week during the month of September. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. And now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet up to $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. By the way, that deal sounds amazing from FanDuel because as someone who lives in Central Florida, sometimes the Jags play here in this market, and sometimes that doesn't benefit for any of the Dolphins fans who are up here. But grateful to be back here once again on another edition of the show, celebrating once again the Summer of Champions here. And question, if it's still summer type weather in October and even parts of late September, is it still the Summer of Champions if it's the Florida Panthers winning the Stanley Cup? I'm asking for a friend. But let's get right to the topics at hand. Today, we're going to talk about the Florida Panthers and once again being front and center at some sporting events that we spoke a little bit about Evan Rodrigues being at the Marlins game, which we are going to discuss a question that he was asked in segment number 2 of the show. And then segment number 3, we unfortunately lost a legend in cinema in James Earl Jones. And I want to talk about a quote from a movie. If you're on YouTube, you could see maybe there's a hint on what movie I am talking about. But I want to discuss more of how a quote from that relates to the Florida Panthers, and also with the Florida Panthers winning a championship and being on the map in the NHL and not only in South Florida. Unapologetically, the Florida Panthers deserve all the main character energy that comes with being a winner in a region like South Florida. So the attention of the region, a lot of it is still on the Florida Panthers still. And I mean, it's still very fresh for this team with everything they've accomplished too. And with Sunday, the Florida Panthers were front and center during the pregame festivities there for them at the Miami Dolphins game on Sunday. And unfortunately, the Stanley Cup was not in the building in Miami Gardens on Sunday, as the Cup was in Darien, Connecticut, like we spoke about on Sunday morning. That it was on its way to Darien, Connecticut for Spencer Knight's day with the Cup, and then it made its way back to South Florida for the fans to take pictures with it at Emirates Bank Arena yesterday. So anyone who had a chance to go there and take their pictures with the Stanley Cup, hopefully you guys got your opportunity there. But the following people were representing the Florida Panthers at the Miami Dolphins game on Sunday. There were Aaron Ekblad, Niko, Mikkola, Carter Verhaeghe, and GM Bill Zito. And crazy to think that with the shirts that they were still wearing from the championship parade, obviously Fanatics is trying to market it more so that they could buy their products, obviously. And obviously they're also a partner with the NFL. So you could take that for what it's worth. And also, this isn't the first time that the Panthers have been at a Dolphins game as a group. They would, I remember Jonathan Huberdeau especially would purchase a suite for some of the players there, and everyone will be sporting Dolphins jerseys. I remember Spencer Knight was the only one not sporting a jersey. I mean, he's from New England, so I assume he's a Patriots fan there. So, but I also remember a game where Jonathan Huberdeau was right on the goal line and then giving a high five when they were playing the Carolina Panthers a few years ago. I was like, oh, that's Jonathan Huberdeau. I recognized him immediately from the the TV broadcast there. But the fact that the difference between them winning and versus being in a suite versus being at the pregame festivities and then counting 5 all the way down to 1 and then chanting "Let's go Dolphins," pressing the button for everything, and then TD having the Go Cats Go jersey with the number 24 representing the year that they won the Stanley Cup. The Panthers once again front and center of everything for this. And when you think about when I think about more of what the Panthers have already done, and but I also constantly think of what more can the Panthers do in order to grab even more attention and maybe even not I would say not necessarily take over the whole attention in South Florida sports, because I mean when you have all 4 sports teams and the population is so spread apart too, the everyone's priorities is a little different from what they pay attention to. But with the Panthers and winning, even people who might not even be into sports, this might be the first sport that they get into. I mean, and that's what having a sense of victory. It's not only a victory for the players; it's a victory for the region, and we all feel it as this place economically grows. We speak all about the economic impacts of a championship too, with it. And I think of really an example of that is just our neighbors a little bit to the northwest of the Panthers, and think about how much attention like the team like the Tampa Bay Lightning have too, with them winning multiple championships, and even the marketing around the downtown Tampa area. There's more marketing in regards to the Tampa Bay Lightning that I've seen than the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and the Buccaneers are in the most popular league, not only in the United States, but in the world too. I get that the Panthers and the Dolphins are in different locations. The Dolphins have been here a lot longer than the Panthers, but the Panthers truly have an opportunity because this is something that I see as sustainable for over a long period of time, with everyone still with a lot of the core still being around for at least 6 years, that this could be really a big opportunity for them to really put a staple and just be that even when that part of their window is closed, that people are going to go to games over and over again. People are going to be wearing gear still from this championship run, and that there's so many ripple effects that when you win versus when you lose, that it has there. It's I just remember talking about what would have happened if they blew that 3-0 lead, is that all the momentum that you've created you would sorry, as my alarm goes off, you would have to start not necessarily back to square one, but you would wonder how they would get back to getting to a point of really truly grabbing the attention. And the winning definitely did do that. But how much more do the Panthers need? And this is a rhetorical question, in order to really grab the attention, because it's different for everybody for what they like and everything. And obviously the advantages or the disadvantages of warm weather climate too here, of what people are going to get into. But so it's like having to put double the work in order to grab the attention. And that's what a sustainable product could do if it's more than just one championship too. So for the Panthers, they really truly have an opportunity there. And thankfully with the Panthers, their reach, once again, we talk about Tri-County area, how they are the closest team to the majority of the population. As traffic stinks around here, this place is getting more crowded every single day. So when people think about proximity and going to an event plus winning, I think there's an opportunity that more people are going to choose going to Panther games versus anything else, especially if you're a resident of Palm Beach County. Let's think about those people too, and think people even in the Treasure Coast too. and they want a shorter commute back home too. So that is going to be really something for the Panthers that could really work to their advantage about being that team who could be possibly in the top two of the four major sports leagues in South Florida, who could have the majority of the attention over other two. But I mean, the Heat have their history too with their 3 championships, but they're kind of in a state of mediocrity right now, in my opinion. So this is the Florida Panthers' chance for them to take advantage too here, to really be even more front and center, more than just Sunday at a Dolphins game, even Friday at the Marlins game for Florida Panthers Day. But we're going to transition over to segment number 2, where we are going to discuss a question that Evan Rodrigues was asked during the Marlins game on Friday, and about a possible hangover, what could possibly happen, and what the mindset is for players going into this upcoming season. We're going to discuss that next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. And you heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We all have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet up to $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every single Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Just visit FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. And I'd like to thank you guys once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day here on a Tuesday edition of the show. Now make your second listen to Locked On AHL podcast. Locked On AHL provides you with a national perspective on all things NHL each and every day, with national experts and local insights on every team in the league, available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So we mentioned a little bit about Evan Rodrigues and throwing the first pitch on Friday, a little bit on Sunday, but I did not watch the full interview prior to the first pitch until yesterday, and just the questions that he was asked on just preparing for the season. He was asked about what if Matthew Tkachuk gave him any advice on a first pitch. And by the way, the hat that Evan Rodrigues wore on Friday, oh, it's beautiful. I want to sport it myself there for the old vintage Florida Marlins there. But for Erod, George Richards of Florida Hockey Now, who was present at the game, asked Rhino last year about how they, and Sam Reinhart talked about how the short offseason is something that could help the Panthers. And then he asked Evan Rodrigues, is that the same thing that could happen for the Panthers? Is it something that could help them? And Evan Rodrigues spoke about how it's something that you treat it like any other season. And although that's the normal thing to say if you are a hockey player, one thing we also got to realize is that these guys are human beings. These guys do, and the fact that the Stanley Cup Final ended on June 24th, these guys barely slept in between all that and even the parade. And then when the parade happened on June 30th, less than 24 hours after, a lot of people had to say goodbye, like as in the people as the upcoming UFAs at the time. And they say that, but it's okay. It's okay for, at least for me, to say that this summer is different. I said at the top, the Panthers do deserve that main character energy from being the champions. And it's okay for them to be a little different, that sometimes when you lose in the final the year before, you are more motivated to get back there because you had not climbed the mountaintop yet, versus when you do win, maybe on a day that you would typically be doing your training, you are getting invited to celebrate other guys' day with the cup. And Evan Rodrigues spoke a lot about that, about the stresses of having the day with the cup versus how much more relaxed someone is when they are attending someone else's party. I remember Aaron Ekblad and Sam Bennett. Aaron Ekblad had Sam Bennett at his day with the Cup party over in Ontario too. But it's okay for this one to be more celebratory, and for maybe and it makes them human beings too. That you work so hard that you deserve that type of celebration. And obviously eventually you got to get back into the lab and get to work more. And even for us fans, what we're experiencing with this championship, I mean, my content would be a lot different this summer had the Panthers lost versus winning. I mean, we are very fortunate in order to just continue talking about the stories and storytelling and everything. And even for how we go about our day too. We're driving down the interstate, we're seeing billboards around Broward County saying congratulations to your Stanley Cup champion Florida Panthers, or something silly like going and showing off your Stanley Cup championship polo at your day job, or you might have a Yeti or tumbler at your corporate office water cooler that you want to show off there. And a lot of you can, I'm sure, can relate to that. I mean, informal skates are about to happen if they haven't already. They're not documented, and coaches can't be present due to the rules of the collective bargaining agreement. But for this, it's okay for it to be a little different due to the fact that you've accomplished the goal of winning. But the question that internally each and every player now needs to ask themselves and tell themselves too is how can I, the individual, because we talk about hockey as a team, as a we over me, what can I do as the individual during this time in a summer that maybe I've gone out more than usual, drank more than usual, and maybe delayed getting back on the grind? How can I mentally buy back in? And obviously these guys talk all the time. There's communication between the coaching staff, the training, even when they're away too. So thankfully they don't lose the goal in mind. The great teams like the Sidney Crosby Penguins, the Lightning, even all those Detroit Red Wings teams that made the playoffs over and over and over again, they always find a way to adjust. They always find a way to reinvent themselves. This is the opportunity for the Panthers to truly reinvent themselves too as a franchise, not only on the ice but off too, for what they do. And for going back to the question that was asked for Evan Rodrigues, is just getting back into the grind and getting back to work and treating it like a normal offseason. Thankfully, though, for them, getting all the way to the final, they're not as battered as bruised, at least from what they tell us. They've told us, excuse me, past tense. They're not as battered and bruised as last year. And honestly, the 16 games that Montour and Ekblad missed, I feel also really truly worked to their benefit too, on less mileage on the tires too. But there's also another way of looking at this, and it's just a constant question all the time, not just in hockey, but any sport that has a series going from one series to another, like baseball and basketball. Are you worried more about the mileage on players or momentum for them going into the next series or even the next season too? And that's something that I think about for the Panthers going all the way to the very, very last game of the season on June 24th versus a team that season was over back in April. Their training began right away, but they haven't had true NHL action. They haven't been hit as hard as in a game setting. They're not up to game speed versus the Panthers. Obviously, your body is used to hits. I mean, if you're in the National Hockey League, you're used to getting hit and along the boards. But the time in between all that for a player who played in June versus playing in April, what your body remembers and in taking those hits along the boards or even fighting for loose pucks, your body is going to feel a little bit different when you take that time off due to not getting in a game setting. But also, there's another way of thinking about it of if you because the more games that you've played throughout this, there might be an injury that you might have ignored throughout the postseason that you might have downgraded and said, maybe it's not that big of a deal. And then you take a hit and you're thinking, oh, maybe I was more hurt than I thought I was too. So there's other ways of thinking about this whenever it comes to how the Florida Panthers are going to start the season. I think they're going to be very conservative during the preseason on who plays and who doesn't. So, and which is honestly a great opportunity for younger guys to get more of that ice time so that they can prove themselves even more. So, and going into training camp, I mean, Paul Maurice, even though he says that the Stanley Cup doesn't define him, he still has something to chase. He still has 101 wins. He's 101 wins away from passing Joel Quenneville in all-time wins for second all-time, even though looks like that sometime over the next year, Joel Quenneville is probably going to be hired behind an NHL bench as he has been reinstated by the NHL, but that's neither here nor there. But Paul Maurice is still chasing after something in being one of the all-time greats. He did say that he needs a Stanley Cup to be considered. He's got that, but now starting to add on to his profile for when he goes into the Hockey Hall of Fame as a builder. So that's something to consider there. And I'm hoping, like he chirped Brandon Montour in his very first training camp for asking him, "You're not tired?" I want him to do that all for the new guys and the new guys coming in, the Nate Schmitz, Jesper and Adam Boquist, Thomas Noshak, AJ Greer, even the guys who were around the Florida Panthers last year but didn't make it, Mackie Semiskevich, Justin Sordiff. I want Paul Maurice to chirp the heck out of those guys and say, and as a way of, don't be comfortable here, earn your spot too. So and it starts from the guy up top to make sure that the Panthers truly don't experience that hangover. And that's what having that, the adultiest of the adult. I know adultiest isn't a word, but you have that guy there in order to steer the ship for the guys, and the guys follow after their leader. And thankfully for the Panthers, they identified that a few years ago when they first hired him. But coming up, we are going to discuss a line from a cinematic legend who recently passed this over the last 24 hours. And what movie quote can we relate from a past movie of theirs into the journey of the Florida Panthers? We're going to discuss that next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Third and final segment here on this Tuesday, September 10th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. And by the way, if you guys have not seen yet Monday Night Raw of WWE, Sami Zayn, where Monday Night Raw was held at the Saddle Dome in Calgary, came out and sported a Johnny Gaudreau jersey, and just goes to show once again how impactful Gaudreau was throughout the community, the hockey community overall. And Alex Singleton, who currently plays for the Denver Broncos, and he's a former Calgary Stampeder, was wearing a Gaudreau jersey as he was going into the tunnel prior to his game there on Sunday when the Denver Broncos faced the Seattle Seahawks there too. So, but unfortunately, we did lose someone else in the world, but this one in the world of cinema, of James Earl Jones. Some of you guys know him as the voice of Darth Vader. Some of you guys know him as the voice of Mufasa from The Lion King. Some of you guys know him from Field of Dreams there. But I went on Instagram the very next day after the Panthers won the Stanley Cup, and I said this one movie quote from James Earl Jones. And crazy to think that I wasn't nothing crossed my mind about him passing possibly 3 months later after that, and that was an Instagram exclusive for that. So follow the page on Instagram and on Twitter, as you will see a different experience versus what you get in podcast form. But I think about more of this quote from The Lion King, which no relation to Alex Lyon in this one, but I think of the quote, "Remember who you are." And when you think of Panthers getting to the final, the the getting up to a 3-0 lead, and then the amount of plays that the Edmonton Oilers were making and the Panthers just going outside of their structure throughout the games 4-6. But we kind of saw this coming a little bit, even in game 3 when the Panthers went up 1-0 with one of the many breakaway goals that they had when Warren Fogle scored on a breakaway where Mikkola jumped on the play, Bennett stayed back, Kulikov mishandled on the blue line, and then it was late to react. And then 7 of the 8 goals in game 4 were on breakaways, and two of them in that span being shorthanded goals of guys up in the play, 4 checkers very, very deep, which untimely changes, and a lot of these mishandlings of the puck for the Panthers at that time really came in the neutral zone too, or really close to their offensive blue line. The errant passes that we saw from Brandon Montour as he was trying to make it point to point to Barkov, and then going Connor Brown, I believe it was, going on a breakaway, or in the case of Carter Verhaeghe in Game 6, an errant pass to Sasha Barkov, and then going, and then Draisaitl kind of getting going a little bit for the Edmonton Oilers as he and Warren Fogle score on an odd man rush to make it 1-0 in Game 6 too. And then in Game 6, the Panthers getting 2 shots through the first 20 minutes too, and then having a goal disallowed by Alexander Barkov because Sam Reinhart's skate was slightly offside. That even though you only had 2 shots through 20 minutes, you had that opportunity to really calm things down there too. Even though Sasha Barkov scored later that game, that Barkov was really the only guy who really showed out for the Panthers. And really the games 4 and 5 for the Panthers, I mean, just the questions on who should run the power play with the and also in game 4 when there was a turnover for the Panthers and they were chipping it up, Brandon Montour collided with his own goalie, and that led to a goal where Barkov was almost there to block the shot and not allow a goal, shorthanded. It was a lot of going outside of their structure and not playing the Florida Panthers hockey that we knew, at least in that season. But it goes back to the whole remember who you are. The Panthers remembered who they were during their run, and really when usually us fans have a little bit of a sense of panic, it's up to the guys in the locker room to not reflect that too, and cut out the outside noise even from talking heads like myself, and to officially just be laser focused, know once again who you are, and go back to everything. Even though in Game 7, shortly after Carter Verhaeghe made it 1-0 for the Cats, Matthias Janmark goes on a breakaway where he got around Aaron Ekblad, and then Bobrovsky didn't make the stop there. I mean, there was one goal that Forsling and Ekblad collapse towards the middle, but Connor McDavid gets through, and then there's a quick one touch back to the doorstep in one of those games, and then they still couldn't stop the Oilers from scoring on their breakaways. I mean, the probably the sickest goal that McDavid scored in that series was getting through four Florida Panthers as they were trying to check more of stick and body, stick and not body, excuse me, and then getting that assist to Corey Perry back in Game 5. for the final. And really, it was really about the guys just not having their heads on a swivel, and really, once again, like we spoke about, not controlling the puck in the neutral zone, and on their offensive blue line, which really put Sergei Bobrovsky in a really poor spot in those 3 games in which the sky was starting to fall for the Panthers, but they avoided truly avoided that disaster. But the Panthers went back to who they were, and that was truly in it all that in itself as a reminder, and that you don't need to do anything fancy. And when you think about the 20 plus games throughout the postseason, it's like you don't try to rearrange what's already worked. And for the Panthers, with tight defensive structure, uh, winning on the boards, getting that quick first pass out, getting them deep, working on your forecheck, getting your changes. And not trying to create a speed game for the Panthers, which two contrasting styles that we truly saw in the final, and we saw what truly wins, and it's defense in the NHL. That is really what we were reminded of, and that the Panthers reminded themselves on what it took to win there. And that is something in that James Earl Jones quote of remembering who they were, and really truly put themselves in that position to just calm things down, and especially when Sergei Bobrovsky was held out of practice due to getting his mind right too. And I think that's such an underrated storyline throughout all of this, for for calming the storm, because there was that storm that was starting to brew for what could have what could have came their way, had the collapse been complete. And they but all at the end of the day, it goes back to what Matthew Tkachuk said. And it's, some teams lose 3 in a row and they don't even get an opportunity to win one more. The Panthers took advantage of their opportunity from everything they did in the first 3, and just needed that one. It took until the very end, but they got it done, thankfully. Especially with things evening out throughout the series, where Edmonton was dominant in game 1, but the Panthers won. Panthers were dominant in later in the series, and they found a way to lose a game too, and things evening out. But then game 7 was the ultimate evening out, as we saw how gassed the Edmonton Oilers were, as they were just having a hard time getting through the zone in the end, as they were the minutes of Connor McDavid, Zach Hyman, Leon Draisaitl were just up and up and up, while the Panthers could still roll their 4 lines too and get to their structure, and once again battle it in the corner too, as the clock is winding down. And those are, once again, the fundamental things that this team works on consistently in the first few days of training camp. And you'll see some of the recording of you'll see some of the tweets, excuse me, from the reporters from camp on who's really battling out in their battles in camp, and who's really showing how their strength truly in these board battles, because it's truly one of the big fundamentals of winning hockey games, on how you battle along especially in the corners too. And that, just setting that tone in training camp, you think about that 9 months later, and it truly manifested into a win, and lifting it, and for this region to just be on cloud 9 too. So Panthers, they remembered who they were. And with that, I say, rest in peace, you legend, James Earl Jones. Thank you guys once again for listening to this edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Come back on Wednesday as it'll be a Winans Wednesday edition of the show where we will be 1 week away at the time from Media Day, where there's still so much to talk about. And then later on in the week, we will be previewing the rookie showcase that will be going on this upcoming weekend in Nashville. So still a lot of stuff to get into and to talk about for the Florida Panthers. But in the meantime, if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey of Flip Livingstone and Stu Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. So I'm Armando Velez, signing off. And you've been listening to the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We're your team every day.